We have, Annie, we've sent around to everybody the planning together document. I don't know how many people have had a chance to look at it.
It's comprehensive.
Kristen, do you take attendance, or do we need everybody to sign in? How does that work?
Well, normally the person that's taking the minutes
I'll take attendance.
should be taking attendance.
I'll take attendance.
Because they said we also have to include who's not here. So let us know when we have a quorum then. I think we do.
Yeah, and I don't think we need one for just a discussion.
Okay.
But I think, I know Ethel's planning to join, and I'm sure a few others are going to be joining. So Annie, can we wait a few minutes?
Yeah, that's fine. I do have a bit of a hard stop. I've got to do a second community board presentation after this one, so I've got to hop off at 7:45.
Which is what,
but,
8?
So if I could hop off at 7:45, I think that would be best. It starts at 7:30, so I'm already showing up a little late. But
we've allocated an hour for this, so hopefully you'll be good.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ken needs to be promoted.
I already did.
There he is.
Thank you.
Can I just give an accolade to Peter while we're waiting?
No,
Yes.
I don't want to get on that topic.
It's funny. It's very funny. Peter discovered a stolen car that had been parked in a fire hydrant for a week, and he finally got the police to remove it today.
But Paige, the same car reappeared on the block at another hydrant. I think.
Oh no!
I think it's a cop's car.
Oh, interesting. Oh dear.
Peter
Only
also
in New York.
I think you just need to remove the hydrant.
I think we should get started because our agenda will go long. Annie, welcome. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself and then a little bit about what's leading up to the City Council's proposal for this comprehensive plan. We sent the document around, but to give us a basic presentation of it would be most helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the time frame.
Yes. So thank you again for inviting me to be here tonight. I'm sorry I couldn't come earlier, but my name is Annie Levers and I'm the Assistant Deputy Director of the Council's Office of Strategic Initiatives. Our division spearheaded the Planning Together report and legislative proposal that I'll be presenting here tonight. And this is a bill that's been introduced in the Council. It'll go through the legislative public hearing process. We do have a hearing scheduled, but that's really just the very beginning of this legislative process. I'll continue to go out to community boards through mid-April at least. I'm still getting requests and having many meetings, and folks are still sort of at different phases in their feedback process. So I will continue to meet with folks and be sort of have an open door to continue conversations well after the hearing. And we don't have a specific timeline in place for a passage date. So that's just a quick overview. I am going to share my screen. Oh, if I could have the ability to share my screen.
Give me a second. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, great. All righty. Okay. So with limited time, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on these key issues, but will instead direct you to the report, which goes into great detail on each of these, citing a lot of good resources and research. But in short, The city's planning mandates are insufficient, they're scattered, they're confusing. This leads to inefficiencies and a lack of coordination between city agencies. Our planning regime is purely reactionary. There are very few meaningful opportunities for communities to proactively plan for their futures. Some neighborhoods have gotten planning attention over the last few years, while others have been totally neglected, left with an outdated 1961 zoning code that promotes out of context as of right development. So the city's sort of piecemeal project by project approach to rezonings has exacerbated inequality, and the budget is rarely, if ever, connected to our policy or land use priorities in any meaningful way, which is exacerbating the fact that our budget decisions are almost entirely divorced from assessments of capital needs, which are also totally insufficient. Oops, hold on one second. So sorry. So the first thing to note is that comprehensive planning is extremely common. So New York City is really an outlier. Almost every other major city in the country engages in some form of comprehensive planning, even in the state. But for decades, New York City has repeatedly abandoned attempts to require comprehensive planning in favor of our sort of ad hoc approach, despite the fact that comp planning is widely accepted as a best practice, especially for confronting the climate crisis and integrating sustainability into all aspects of urban governance. And some might argue that, you know, the way we do things now works just fine, sort of muddling through one project or neighborhood at a time. And while that approach may have gotten us through the last century, a piecemeal approach to combating the climate change is going to be a disaster if we continue on with this sort of piecemeal approach to dealing with the fact that by 2100, New York City's coastal neighborhoods, many of them will flood every day at high tide. And our housing and homelessness crisis is only going to get worse with climate change. 80% of the city's housing units in the current floodplain are affordable housing, and 28% of those units are NYCHA units. But even in the shorter term, you know, unemployment rates are through the roof, small businesses are suffering, but we have no clear paths to create more accessible, high quality jobs for New Yorkers. And we have this backlog of capital needs that grows by billions of dollars every year as our existing infrastructure degrades, yet we have no rational or equitable system for prioritizing what needs to get fixed first and in which neighborhoods, let alone deciding what new infrastructure needs to get built and where. So the comprehensive planning framework is designed to be a shared proactive vision for the city's future across community stakeholders, city agencies, elected officials, and the New Yorkers those elected officials represent. So the comprehensive plan itself would be informed by all these various inputs: principles of equity and justice to correct existing and historic neighborhood disparities and ensure the sort of equitable distribution of resources and development; climate and displacement risks facing our city as a whole, and especially for the neighborhoods already bearing the impacts of climate change; community input to lift up and preserve and enhance what communities love about their neighborhoods and prioritize their vision for change, all while meeting these citywide goals. These would be measurable targets for housing and jobs, resiliency, infrastructure, open space, transportation, arts and culture, you know, public health, all of the good stuff we need to sort of fit into our neighborhoods in order to support thriving communities over the next several decades. A robust physical needs assessment would inform those citywide goals, examining really for the very first time all of the city's existing infrastructure and repair needs on an ongoing basis, and the urgency of those repair needs across our neighborhoods, identifying disparities. Neighborhood history, including an examination of the impact of recent rezonings and development on our neighborhoods to assess whether or not the city's sort of on-the-ground development decisions are really achieving their intended long-term policy goals. And last but not least, neighborhood needs. What are the budget needs of our communities as they stand right now, regardless of whether or not we expect those neighborhoods to grow or change, so that we can prioritize those needs first and foremost in the city's budget and planning process. And these are really standard and common features that comprehensive plans all around the world use to inform their process, and that we've explicitly built into the legislation. So the planning framework streamlines and meaningfully connects the dozens of reports and plans and documents that you see on the left here. These are already required by the charter, often without any opportunity for public input at all whatsoever, while sort of strengthening and creating new resources for communities to use as they proactively plan. So all the documents you see on the left could together be conceived of as a kind of comprehensive plan, but the charter fails to make clear whether or how they're supposed to relate to one another. And on the right, you'll see the depiction of the new cycle that we've designed, which would connect all of these disjointed documents, processes, and reports required by the charter to create one citywide strategic framework and vision. And this really starts with the community board district needs statements, which the charter will now make clear should directly inform the city's budget planning processes. The DNS would then inform the production of this conditions of the city report, which would then feed into the citywide policies and goals, which would inform the long-term plan, which would inform the budget. So each document would build on the last. The charter will also require clear milestones for public engagement before and after the production of each of these new documents, which I'll walk you through later in the presentation. So the framework is designed to create clear opportunities for neighborhoods and communities to proactively plan for their futures rather than just reacting to irresponsible as of right development or rezoning proposals that are already fully baked by the time they reach the community board. So this bill provides the sort of outline or skeleton of what will become the comp plan's public engagement process, which is designed to lay a solid foundation for good, proactive, community-based planning work to get done by setting clear timelines and milestones and sort of well-defined roles for each of the stakeholders you see on the slide that could be built on and adapted over the course of many decades. So in designing this process, it was first important for us to provide opportunities for members of the general public to comment frequently, often early on the proposal directly and the sort of different milestones that are produced. Community boards and borough presidents will play an ongoing role during the 10-year process and would adopt recommended land use scenarios, which would then come to the council for review and adoption, just as 197A plans do now. And these frameworks would essentially set the vision for what future applications would get measured against. The Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability would be the coordinating office working with all of the city agencies to produce the analysis and public-facing documents. And then a new long-term planning steering committee made up of planning experts and borough steering committees that would be required to represent the borough demographically would help set the city's goals. Finally, the CPC would play an ongoing role in their review and certification of future ULURP applications, as they do now, but they'd now be required to measure those applications against the long-term plan. So now I'll walk you through the process. As I mentioned, we've sort of tasked this Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability, which currently puts out the Plan NYC or 1NYC reports with, coordinating across city agencies to get this planning work done. It's a mayoral office that already puts together these reports and would be best positioned to do that sort of coordination. The city's first task would be the production of this first of its kind conditions of the city report in coordination with communities and city agencies. This report would sort of take all the data that currently sits across dozens of reports and plans in the open data portal and put that data into one easy to use place. It would require new analyses, including a physical needs assessment to assess the state of our current infrastructure for the very first time in a comprehensive way, in addition to 2 new indices that Seattle uses to measure access to opportunity and displacement risk. So this conditions of the city report would be produced every 5 years, providing a new and useful resource for community boards and the general public to use. The city would then work in partnership with communities and key stakeholders to determine the city's long-term needs for housing, jobs, open space, schools, all that critical infrastructure, and these would be measurable targets. Then through a robust public engagement process, New Yorkers would help decide where and how the city will distribute that critical infrastructure in their neighborhoods over the next 10 years, prioritizing any necessary new projected growth, if that's the case, in areas with high access to opportunity and lower risk for displacement. Community boards and borough presidents would adopt preferred land use scenarios for each of their relevant community districts. Those would get sent to the council, which would ultimately be responsible for reconciling recommendations from various stakeholders and adopting a final preferred land use map for inclusion in the final long-term plan. Then those would set the vision for our neighborhoods, and we would measure future rezoning applications against those plans. So ULURPs would be required to include, everything would still be subject to ULURP, but they'd now be required to include a statement of alignment, which would describe how the action did or did not align with the long-term plan, introducing a new sort of model for better ensuring implementation. Community boards would still participate in the ULURP process as they do now, but with these new resources to inform your decision-making and recommendations to the council. So the production of the plan would take place over the course of 4 years, from the appointment of the steering committee to the adoption of the final long-term plan. And the graphic on the left here outlines the points at which the bill will require public meetings, adoption of formal recommendations, and council adoption. We essentially required in this initial bill draft just some form of public engagement before and after the production of each formal document in the planning process, from the conditions of the city report to the final long-term plan. And these are really intended to be viewed as baseline minimum requirements for participation required by law. They would provide important milestones for the purpose of public transparency, but are also designed to give the framework sufficient flexibility to sort of grow and adapt that community planning process over time. This slide depicts the full 10-year process. It sort of describes when each document would be due. You see the community board statements of needs appearing every 2 years, which would inform this sort of ongoing process. And the update amendment process would start halfway through the planning process. So after the first cycle, the cycle essentially just starts over again, and each plan would build on the last. Future land use applications would be encouraged and considered, compliance with the long-term plan would be encouraged and considered, but not required. All rezoning actions in furtherance, I'm so sorry about this barking, by the way. I'm sorry if it's distracting, but all future rezoning applications in furtherance of the plan or not would still be subject to ULURP. The ULURP applications would just be required to include the statement of alignment describing how the rezoning does or does not align with the long-term plan. And then community boards would entirely retain their role in the ULURP process with this new sort of resource for assessing neighborhood needs to help inform decision-making processes. While the proposal does indeed add this new requirement to do proactive planning in every neighborhood in partnership with community boards, the bill really makes the most substantive reforms to the city's current budget process and its long-term budget planning process, really. So a new physical needs assessment that I mentioned would require the city to produce a full-blown assessment of infrastructure needs and the resiliency of our current infrastructure, including an indication of the urgency of those repair needs. The document would be produced once every 5 years and add significant transparency to the city's budget process. Unlike Plan YC and the One NYC reports, the final long-term plan would also be required to include detailed budget needs for meeting citywide and neighborhood-specific goals. Those neighborhood-specific goals would be at the community district level and directly informed by your district needs statements and the annual budget requests, as well as this new physical needs assessment to inform both those documents. The 10-year capital strategy right now is really not a useful long-term planning document. It starts off with this sort of long list of excellent goals, like maintaining our infrastructure in a state of good repair and advancing equity. But then the back half of the document doesn't really relate to those goals. It's just a long list of agency spending plans. So these reforms would move the goals further up in the planning process to inform the contents of the long-term plan. And then this 10-year capital strategy would be totally reimagined to be first a list of the infrastructure we need to fund for maintenance and repair needs, and second, a sort of wish list of new and enhanced infrastructure we would need to build, organized by the goals it fulfills in the long-term plan. The capital commitment plan would then serve as sort of an annual budget constrained document where the city would prioritize that spending outlined in the 10-year capital strategy. Right now, the capital commitment plan is produced, but it basically just regurgitates what's in the 10-year capital strategy because that is also a budget constrained document and doesn't really speak to how we're going to achieve citywide goals, but more works within the confines of agencies' current spending plans. Finally, the Ames report, which is already produced, would be sort of reformed to help agencies make sure they have the funds they need to address the most urgent repair needs that year. And so this would look at everything identified in the physical needs assessment that was identified as like really urgent and in need of repair and funds immediately. So we think this process holds a lot of opportunity for the city as a whole and for individual neighborhoods, laying the foundation for better planning work to get done by meaningfully connecting the city's budget, land use, and strategic planning processes, providing new resources, data, and analyses to support proactive community-based planning, identifying and prioritizing communities' urgent budget needs, regardless of whether or not those neighborhoods will be rezoned, and requiring the city to regularly review and recommend updates to the city's zoning code in response to the successes, failures, and unintended consequences of the city's rezoning decisions in areas with other similar conditions. And then finally, just forcing more coordination across city agencies to better achieve citywide and neighborhood goals. So that is my presentation. I'll leave my slides up and continue sharing my screen so that I can pull slides up as folks ask questions, and I can use those to answer them. Jeanette, if you're muted. Are you talking?
We have a question from Rebecca
Sorry.
Zimmer.
Yeah, but wait.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Fair person, I want to talk first, Christian.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I would like, your presentation was very generic of all the great policy sort of things that this is going to solve, but you didn't really discuss how. And in previous, we had an earlier discussion internally, but if you could walk through the structural changes that you're proposing for how, with the new, creating the new entity a little bit clearer. Exactly. I think if you went very quickly through this, if you could talk more specifically about what the legislation would be proposing.
This is exactly what it would propose. It's this new process that would layer on. When you say a new entity, is there a specific question that you have with respect to the proposal, or I can speak to any of those specifics?
My understanding is that you're creating a new, if you could go back to the previous slide that had it.
Yes.
The long-term planning, Office of Long-Term Planning Sustainability and the Long-Term Planning Steering Committee.
Yep, sure. So the Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability is an existing office. They already exist, and they go by the name right now of the Mayor's Office of Sustainability. But in the charter, their name is the Mayor's Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability. They dropped the long-term plan piece of it, which I think sort of shows where priorities are right now. But they produce this Plan NYC and One NYC report already, and we think a mayoral office is really best positioned to coordinate this work instead of sitting it in one agency, whether that's DCP or HPD or otherwise, to help make sure that the comprehensive plan is truly comprehensive and includes input from all the city agencies doing good planning work already. The long-term planning steering committee, funnily enough, actually also already exists. We're subsuming another steering committee that advises on that Plan NYC report. So they are a sitting body. We're just reforming the structure significantly to make sure. So right now it's appointed just by the mayor. This would reform that to be appointed by a mix of elected officials. So it would be 13 members in total. 4 would be appointed by the mayor. 4 would be appointed by the speaker of the city council, and then each borough president would get 1 appointee, so 13 in total. And this body is really, designed to be, or it's envisioned to be a technical body of planning experts with a recommendation or a requirement, in the bill for them to include, folks who have been historically underrepresented or excluded from planning decisions. But they really are envisioned as a body that can help determine the city's sort of technical needs for addressing population increases, but also infrastructure needs over the next several decades. They would also be required to convene borough steering committees, which are also reflected on this slide right here. Borough steering committees would inform their work. So this body would be responsible for setting citywide goals for all these sort of infrastructure areas, including housing, but also open space, transportation, arts and culture, sewer infrastructure, whatever it is. And they would work in coordination with these borough steering committees, which would be required to be demographically diverse and represent the actual residents and workers of that borough. So that would be sort of like a second tier of engagement. You could see that being appointed by, the actual steering committee would be responsible for appointing those bodies. So each of the boroughs would be fully represented, and then they would work in coordination with each other to set these citywide and neighborhood goals.
Thank you.
No problem.
Roberta had her hand up, and then Louisa.
Can we switch back to the people?
You can do it on your screen.
You want me to stop sharing my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, Roberta.
So I have a couple of questions. And thank you, Annie. I saw your early presentation to board, was it board 11?
Yeah.
In January, and I appreciate it. A couple of my concerns are neighborhood needs and the community input and the district needs statement. So my concerns are that we're further along in the process. We're not involved when you're in the beginning, when the community is being, when the charrettes and some of the earlier process are going on. Normally community boards are involved very early in the process. So why was this decision made? And then it's a 10-year plan, but things happen in 5 years, 4 years. There's who knew that Sandy would occur in 2013.
Yeah.
Stuff happens. So how do we impact some of those decisions?
Sure. So I'm actually just going to pull up my, do you mind if I share my screen just to pull up the slide? Really? You don't want me to, or you don't mind?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right. So, Richard and I talked a little bit about the public engagement requirements. I think a lot of the public meetings that we required in the bill are required to happen at the community district level. But, it's true that the bill only requires sort of the community board to formally adopt recommendations at that land use scenario phase, where you're adopting a recommendation to send to the council for the land use scenario that you'd like to see adopted in the final long-term plan. But that does not mean that we intended for community boards to only, participate in that piece of the process. A lot of the meetings that we're requiring along the way in this sort of this graphic on the left here, you'll see, some of them are at the borough level where you're talking about the conditions of the city, and many others are at the community district level. So this is feedback that we've heard, that perhaps the bill could be more specific about the points at which community boards will be required to weigh in at each point in this process. But the idea of the bill is really that we're getting input from the public before the production of each document and after the production of each document. And all told, over the 4-year process, that worked out to be like 123 public meetings. But again, those would be like bare minimum requirements that would be legally required by law over that 4-year period.
And one of my other concerns was that funding went to the mayor's office and not to the community boards to help us get expertise that could help us make these decisions, because our funding is fairly limited, and to get expertise costs money.
Yes, understood. And this is something I'm hearing from a lot of community boards. The bill does not actually explicitly state that the mayor's office specifically would get the resources, but your point is taken that it requires that mayor's office to do so much that it would need additional resources in order to get it done. Legislation is very bad at, we can't explicitly write dollar amounts for the resources that community boards would or should get in the bill. But this is really helpful, feedback. I do understand that there's a need, that community boards are completely under-resourced, and so this is the beginning of a conversation of what those types of resources would need to look like and where they would come from. I was informed actually yesterday during a community board meeting that the Office of Civic Engagement actually did a survey of community boards, which basically just identified exactly what folks think they would need. I don't know if you all participated in that. I assume you did, but it really identified that all community boards should just be able to hire their own planner, essentially. So that's something I'm definitely going to take a look at. It's not something we would be able to build into the bill in terms of the sort of dollar amount that you would get in order to resource. So if you do have a planner on staff already that you work with or what have you, and you think what you actually need is some other set of resources, maybe a facilitator for community meetings, et cetera, the dollar amount, again, would not be able to appear in the bill, but we can work with folks to make sure that the sort of resources that we outline in the bill that the city is providing provide at least a baseline set of resources for folks to work with. And so, we welcome your input on that and feedback.
That's very important.
Paige, I'm sorry, Paige?
Caught me unawares. Well, first of all, thank you very much. To be honest, I read this and I was confused because past master plans for the city of New York have been much more outreached in terms of many of the aspects of city life, development, living, schools, etc. And one of the things that I found lacking here is, given this is really sponsored by the city council and they definitely have training and interest, there's no outreach to the Landmarks Commission, city planning, transportation, to integrate when these items hit a neighborhood. I mean, you need a mix of things. It's not just simply an organization chart and then you go back to charrettes, etc. The drivers of this is the community. And beyond the community board, the collector of all this data that makes our rich environment is made up of these city agencies. And it worries me that this is not a plan for the future, because it's going to, in 4 years, there could be 2 different electoral cycles with people moving in and out of this process. And I believe, isn't Mr. Johnson back at school now? Isn't he doing a degree in architecture now, if I remember correctly? I mean, he's going to be there for another 3 years before he can input some of the details of what he's learned. So I don't understand, without the community involvement, without input to sync the landmarks commissions, city planning, transportation, infrastructure, environmental protection, sustainability, I don't know where this will lead.
So I thank you for that comment. I mean, I think what this is forcing is for that coordination to occur for the very first time in a way that it hasn't. So I'm not sure if you're talking about our legislative process or the bill as proposed and the
bill
process
is proposed. There's no room for anyone else. This is a timeline over 4 years that's going to take 10 years. And look what happened. We had a pandemic. Who knew it was going to last a year or 2 years? What happens if we have a third pandemic? And there's no economic strength to this. There's no job opportunities. There's no training as the city improves to keep people in New York City. I don't know. In its present form, I have to say I have my doubts. And I'm not sure New York needs this type of planning document. I think we need one that's far more granular, that actually looks at for instance, our board. We turn our attention every 2 or 3 years to different aspects. And right now we're looking at existing housing and how we can make that existing housing more livable to keep the people that are there in their homes. This seems to me to be a huge wheel of fortune, to be honest. And I'm having, again, maybe I need to read it a third time, but I'm not convinced that this is the approach that would help New York City. Sorry.
Thank you for those comments. And I think in terms of the sort of agency engagement, I do think that this really is in every other city that this is in place, which is basically every other city in the country and most cities in the world. They engage in some form of comprehensive planning to do exactly what you're describing, which is to sort of force agency coordination and make sure that there is an ongoing cycle of planning that occurs. Right now, there really is no proactive planning for the city as a whole that occurs on an ongoing basis with opportunities for input from every level of the community throughout each phase in the process. As I sort of mentioned, the city's producing a lot of these strategic plans, but often in siloed agencies. You know, the HPD produces its housing report, DOT produces its transportation report. The two do not necessarily connect together and often can work against each other. So what this would do is really force those conversations to be had for the first time in a real and meaningful way.
It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that here. It doesn't say thou shalt communicate with each other. This is in a vacuum. One adopted final 10-year statement district needs. It doesn't talk about the people who live in these communities and what their needs are at all.
I mean, the bill
Sorry, I'm
really
talking too
does.
much. I want to hear from
No,
my.
that's okay. No, that's okay. I just want to make you aware of the places where the bill does do that, which is a couple of places. I think it really strengthens the role of the district needs statement in a way that will, for the first time, make very clear that that needs to inform future budget planning documents, as opposed to perhaps just being ignored by the city or kicked to the council for budget requests. So this would really inform those long-term planning budget documents in a way they've never before. I would say that the assessment of community needs and this physical needs assessment would also make sure that the city is doing its due diligence to identify repair needs for our current city infrastructure in a way that we don't do right now. The conditions of the city report, we're working with a coalition led by ANHD, which is inclusive of a lot of, community development groups that have been working in the city for decades, including groups like RPA and also like Riders Alliance, et cetera. So this conditions of the city report is extremely robust, and it includes a requirement for the city for the first time to assess all of our affordable housing stock as it exists right now, including expiring regulatory tools and investment needs to actually keep those units affordable, to really preserve housing and keep people in place. And that's something that the city does not regularly do now. And this would be requiring the city to do that every 5 years. So, those are just some examples. We really are working hard, and with groups like yours, to try to improve the bill and make sure it hits the right notes. The bill does not specify like the chapters of what this comprehensive plan will look like. So I don't want you to take away that the report we put together will be reflective of the plan that's produced. I think it has a long list of the types of topics that would be considered. And in that long list, there is an implicit understanding that those agencies will need to coordinate. Perhaps the bill could be more explicit about that. So I'll definitely take that back. But that is certainly the intention.
Louisa? Louisa,
I'm unmuting.
okay.
Okay. So there was a lot of work. This was based on the RPA's proposal going back to 2018, wasn't it? And the thing is that when you say all cities have a comprehensive plan, they do. So many of them do. And it's an important thing to have. However, this is a top-down structure that puts in more layers of bureaucracy in a city that already is having trouble making connections between agencies because of the bureaucracy that exists. I don't understand also, there's going to be a 13-member committee for this very long-winded name, long-term planning steering committee. No, that isn't even it. But
that was exactly it. Sorry.
That's the overall?
Yeah, the long-term planning steering committee is the name.
That's the mayor's one that's going to be organizing the whole thing. So basically,
it's
that
not
is
the mayor.
taking,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's
Go
not.
ahead.
That's taking the role of city planning, right? See, a lot of what you said is what city planning does. What you are adding onto it is the comprehensive planning that city planning rarely does anymore, mainly because the city is cash poor. Something that I noticed in reading this is it's wonderful to align the capital budget with the infrastructure needs, et cetera, et cetera. But nowhere in this really did you allow for the private sector. And we have to deal as a community board very often, excuse me, I have a cold, with the private sector. The only place I could see where they actually came in is if they did not align with the final plan, they would not be permitted to build. But no.
No, they can build, but they have to explain it.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
of course.
It's a transparency requirement. Yeah, so they would still be able to move through the alert process.
Presumably, if they can explain why they don't align with, they would still be permitted to build.
Right.
But nowhere in here was anything about the importance of dealing with the private sector. And New York City is built by the private sector, and we have to deal with it. It seems to me it's top down, and what the community board is dealing with and what you're talking about is coming from the bottom up, community-based planning and knitting it together to make a city. And this seems to me coming from the other direction.
I appreciate your comments. I mean, I think the intention here was to force the city to provide the resources that communities need to have productive conversations. But I appreciate your comments and you know,
When you say resources, are you talking about money or are you talking about planners? When you talked about this commission, the 13 people, presumably they would need a huge staff, right?
Yeah, that long-term planning steering committee would be appointed by a mix of elected officials. So it wouldn't be a mayoral entity. The way we have the bill set up right now, it would likely be staffed by the Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability in order for them to get their work done in coordination with the city agencies they'd be required to work with. So DCP would provide the population projections as they produce now. The housing needs information would probably come from HPD in terms of our affordable housing stock and what sort of subsidies would be needed to reach deeper levels of affordability. DOT would provide information on our street conditions, et cetera. So this, you know, this mayoral office would play that coordinating agency to staff that long-term steering committee. The resources that we're providing, I think, is really, first of all, just this conditions of the city report, which I think it would be sort of a first of its kind document, which unto itself would, I think, prepare a lot more community boards and communities in general to have productive conversations around planning, just by simply putting all of this data and information that you often have to hire a consultant to put together or to beg the city to put together if you're going through a neighborhood-wide rezoning. They would just be producing that for every community district on an ongoing every 5 years in a way that they really haven't before. And it would also just create the framework for these, you know, conversations to be had around what the needs are of the district for the budget as it stands right now, regardless of growth or change, to really make sure that the, you know, disinvestment or the, you know, under-resourced areas of your district that are a priority for you right now are prioritized in the budget cycle for that year, sort of not even looking forward to future change. So, you know, I do think that this does hold a lot of opportunities to have really good proactive community-based planning conversations in a way that the city is just simply not engaging in them right now. You know, if you want to put together a 197A plan, the city's not going to provide you with the resources you need to get that done most of the time. And this will just force that to be the case, you know, on an ongoing basis.
Right.
I'm just gonna go to Jeanette, Peter, Shelley, and Ethel in that order, just because that's where it is on my screen.
Actually,
Melissa.
I'll speak last. So I have Shelley, Melissa, Ethel, Peter, Seema. So Shelley, you're.
So may I speak? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
First, I think from political point of view, this is doomed. Having the mayor have 4 appointees, having the speaker have 4 appointees, and having each borough president having 1 appointee means that politically decisions will be made on what people want, and 8 to 5 of individual political leaders versus representatives of a borough seems not appropriate. But getting back down to basics, New York City was not one entity before 1898. It didn't develop from colonial times to today altogether, coordinated, okay? The infrastructure issues are very different from borough to borough, community to community. I don't see how this additional layer of bureaucracy will create a better outcome in terms of the needs of the city and its residents. The biggest issue for me is infrastructure and sustainability. And there may be greater priorities in one place than the other, and different priorities depending on everything from this closeness to the water to the age of aspects of the infrastructure. So there needs to be some overall planning but it has to be about not what a group decides is the greatest need, but where we analyze it in a way, in a macro way and in a micro way. I don't see any better planning happening at community boards from this plan, because unless they're specific for the support that community boards will have in terms of consultants and other to deal with the issues that are confronting them, and a greater role in the process, and with the borough presidents having one vote ultimately at the top, it seems like a no-go in terms of effectiveness. As was mentioned before, a lot of great things were mentioned before. What if a pandemic happens and the plan doesn't fit? What if a superstorm Sandy takes place and there are other special needs that need to take priority? 10-year planning sounds nice. I don't think it's realistic, except for large infrastructure issues. I think this is more complicated than the current process, and it doesn't have the fingerprints anywhere of all our city agencies, the ones who have the expertise from transportation, okay, from parks, from every aspect of city life, housing that is not in good shape now. How can you plan for future housing without being especially concerned about improving the conditions that exist now? It's just so complicated. I would think that maybe a borough comprehensive plan might be more doable, but this to me seems like just, I'm sorry, but layer upon layer. And I think the community-based planning is the loser. And it's the people living in communities that make up our city and care about their communities most. So I've said a lot of different things, but I'm totally disenchanted. Thanks for the presentation. It's very clear, but to me, it doesn't seem like it'll be effective in addressing the important needs of our city.
Peter.
I want to compliment Charlie. I agree with him very much that this is, I have in my hand here, I don't know if you can see it. Can you see this?
Yep.
Can everybody see this?
It was the first slide she showed.
Yeah.
This is Mayor Lindsay's plan for New York from 50 years ago, exactly. It was in 1971, 72 that this plan came out. And these books are huge. They're about 1.5 feet square, and there's one for every borough. And there was a huge effort done when Lindsay and his planning commissioner came into power then, and there was a whole new approach to planning for New York. And it was almost, I'm not even sure whether the community boards existed then. I think that was before there was a community planning board.
Yep.
But we now have all the various community planning boards in the city. We have a city planning commission that, in my opinion, is not up to the task. But we have community planning boards that have a lot of people. In fact, there are a bunch of architects in almost every community planning board now. I've been in touch with the AIA, and they're encouraging more architects to be active, which is altogether new. And these are architects who live in their respective community boards in the neighborhoods. And I think there's a lot more that can be done because the Department of City Planning is not where Dick Ravitch was years ago and others, you know, who were very much Don, what's his name, the Commission of City Planning back in the early 70s. They were really very sophisticated. They had something at City Planning called the Urban Design Group, which was a new group, mostly of architects, that authored this. So what I'm saying is that this 70-page document, Planning Together, by Corey Johnson, that I read today, is very basic. It's just maybe the very first step, and it doesn't say very much. It says they want to do things, but I think they were a long way away from really doing something of value for the city. And I would strongly advocate that they distribute money to the community boards, and then each community board, if necessary, hire some help in authoring this new plan, if you will, 50 years after the old one was from Don Elliott when he was chairman of the City Planning Commission, when he produced this plan for New York.
I think Ethel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, just a quick note. I didn't live at all what Peter was just describing of all those volumes, but behind a bookcase in my room is also the big book of just described in dimensions, as Peter did, because I picked it up in a store years later and I put it behind the bookcase, and it is the summary in hard copy of that plan in the Lindsay administration. And I thought maybe someday I can take it out and take a look. Quickly, I do want to commend Anne because she's indefatigable and she is good, and she gives us the summary and is not fazed when we offer big criticisms, but I feel she's taking it all in, and I feel a note of appreciation. On the study itself, I want to just say one or two quick appreciations and then get quickly to a number of very key points here that echo some of what others have said and in a slightly different way. What I found remarkably valuable is the 30 or 40 or 50 pages, I don't even know, of the tracking of the history of planning and the efforts and what was called planning and all those efforts that you have put together with the complexity and the failures. That is one of the most educational and important summaries of failures, of successes, and one could pull, and we could pull out actually themes that really count. I'll just say that. Secondly, I'm going to start with the hardest thing, and that is the timing of this, the process of it is ridiculous and very difficult. Why? It comes from the city council. It's utterly it was admirable when perhaps the speaker was running for mayor. And it's a wonderful attempt. However, the legislation, one hearing, and the legislation, which I think Christian sent, I sent around the text to everybody tonight, and the timing of it makes no sense whatsoever. It cannot happen this way, and particularly realistically, we are in a very big election where half the city council is moving out, and you have to have this as a major discussion, the beginning of this. I think that there are many points that you have made here, but to decide on approving it or not in the face of phenomenal, important political constraints here, and it's not going to work this way. It can't work in this fashion. Now, on quick points to some degree made by others, it was very admirable that you started, and you've said many times that too long, and it's now critical, the inequities in our city on racial grounds, on economic grounds, and that it has been built in, and there's a huge disparity among the communities which has to stop. The fact that you did that is very admirable. However, you have sadly said that you're going to strengthen the community boards, but the structure absolutely does not, because everything comes back to that political long-term planning, or whatever it's called, in which there are 3 scenarios that it makes. Everybody has to weigh in on those. And then there are overtly, clearly political decisions made by the 12 elected officials or appointed by elected officials. With all due respect, it's a little bit like in a different era, the Board of Estimate. With all that, it's very much like it, though the Supreme Court ruled that we had to get rid of it, but it seems the same way. Most significantly, and I think that your motives were good, but it's not working. For example, you hardly give the community boards enough time or resources. They have to choose from options, created by the committee, and then they have less than 6 months for the community boards to respond meaningfully to the framework. It's unrealistic in every way. And then there's a director or somebody who can veto or choose among what the scenarios, a preferred scenarios, and the community boards could never respond in time, and you can't expect them to, and it's a kind of built-in potential to fail, and it is not real participation, though there are motivations to say we've got to do better. But the system now does not prevent it. The ULURP applicants, every time there's an individual applicant, they have to state if the application conforms with the alignment that you've set up, a statement of alignment with the framework. But it's very hard to know what's in that statement. How is it going to be used? Do the community boards really have resources? 197A plans, which are a decent attempt, tend to fail because they don't have enough resources. It takes too long, and there is not the support within the community to do that, to be able to move forward. And then just a couple of other things. It's one last thing. Annie, do you mind for one moment if you change the screen, and if you get to your nice PowerPoint, the one of the way the agencies now, and next to it is what you're proposing, the circles of each. No, it's yeah, okay. Sorry, I guess we've got out picture, but this will be my last point, though there's many, many more. The current system, you know, which has a number of different agencies that appear superficially to be dealing with the needs and issues that any city would need. I mean, the capital needs, the city strategic policy statements, borough, district needs, a capital strategy. I am unclear. These agencies do exist. Politically, there's often difficulty coordinating them, but why can't they now? Why? Because yes, you need the emphasis on comprehensive planning, but it's not going to work if the mayor and others do not arrange for the coordination, which can happen now. It can happen now politically and funding and so on. And that can be improved within some of what already exists, and is in some ways beginning to improve because of the need for waterfront planning and adaptation to the terrible needs of climate change. The last point is, if we look at your much neater, your planning, this adopted preferred land use scenario and the statements of alignment are so overtly on paper and so enormously political and doubtful. I mean, I'll take Shelley's points and a number of others to say it looks good on paper, but it's not. It's on paper, and it has to work politically. We need time now. Much of what you've said is important, and what you're pushing the city toward. It's not good for it to happen this way. Some piece of legislation and an institute. It's really not going to happen in an electoral year in this particular way. It could be the beginning of a real conversation. It shouldn't be something that's passed now in a piece of legislation.
Thank you for your comments. Can I just jump in to say one quick, I'll keep it to 1 minute.
I appreciate it, Annie.
Melissa, did you?
Yeah,
No
my hand's
problem.
been up for like a long time. So, but yeah.
Melissa, I'm sorry. I'll keep it really
Annie, why don't
fast,
you start,
Melissa.
then Melissa, and then
Yes, I mean, Ethel, your comments are well taken. Thank you for your perspective. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to clarify 2 little points.
Yes.
The goal setting exercise that this long-term planning steering committee will produce will really, that'll be the end of their input. So they'll produce these sort of citywide and neighborhood level targets, but the actual plans that would be adopted would not be informed beyond those targets. So that, you know, you would be able to sort of work with communities in terms of making sure that you're setting those priorities and making sure sort of where and how that growth needs to be produced, or if it's not growth, you know, infrastructure investments really is what those targets are intended to depict. And so they don't have a binding say on anything except for those citywide targets that we would then work with, and community boards could suggest amendments to. The body that would have the final say on sort of what's in the plan would be the council. And so just sort of flagging that, I think there is sort of a misunderstanding, or maybe it's just an overemphasis on what this long-term planning steering committee role would be. That would really just be a body, you know, when the mayor comes out and says, we need 300,000 affordable housing units, right? Like there's no input on that. There is no process through which we can comment on whether or not that's the right number, whether or not we're setting the depth of affordability correctly. That doesn't go to the council as a plan. This would provide opportunities for a broader set of stakeholders to actually inform those goal setting documents. And that's the role that long-term planning steering committee would play. The community boards, you know, also would be able to start developing land use scenarios from the moment those goals are set, which really would be, you know, a multi-month process. It wouldn't just be 6 months, and you would not be required to adopt one of the 3 that were produced as resources by the city. Those resources are really just forcing the city's hand to, you know, do some good planning work, just help people sort of visualize some different scenarios for what they need to achieve. But the community board could develop land use scenario and suggest amendments to those targets at that point. And then ultimately it would be with the council to adopt that as the long-term plan. The only place that the director is choosing a scenario to be included in the long-term plan is if the council fails to act. This is a sort of similar fail-safe that exists for our budget process, but the council would be the adopting body ultimately and have the final say, not that long-term planning steering committee.
Annie, just to clarify, the targets, as I read this document, the targets are set by the long-term planning, whatever it is, without input from the community boards and then sent to the community boards.
There would be opportunities for input before and after the production of
Well,
those.
there's not
It
according
doesn't
to
say
your,
community boards. So that point is very well taken as we
Right,
discussed, like there's no formal requirement in the bill as it stands right now for community boards to pass a resolution on those targets.
well,
So
we
that's,
have to deal with the bill as it stands right now, correct?
no, yes. But I guess I'll just underscore that like this is the legislative process. I am, this is kind of unique, but I am committed to going out to community boards and hearing feedback like this for a reason and a purpose. I'm not just listening. I'm going to take this back.
It just seems to me that your intentions are pure, but the legislation is lacking.
Fair
Is that a
enough.
fair
And we
comment?
hope to improve it through this
Okay.
process significantly. And that's why I'm here tonight. So I
Sorry,
just want to.
Melissa?
Thanks. So I really appreciate the goal here, which is kind of thinking through how we can achieve these big citywide goals, say like building affordable housing and, still having some community input. But I guess I have some concerns around the fact that like ULURP itself is not changing. I know these growth scenarios are created and, if projects fit within them, I don't think they have to be voted upon, but my understanding is that council members can still choose to call up land use applications for a vote. And, I think local member deference really gets in the way of a lot of creation of affordable housing and housing overall in the city. So I guess I'm a bit concerned that this plan won't actually fundamentally result in any change because the council could continue to call up every single ULURP application. But correct me if I'm like misreading the report because I read it several weeks ago.
No, you're exactly correct. The council would retain its role to vote on all ULURP applications. The applications that are consistent could still be called up through this sort of ministerial process where they would be required to get 7 signatures from other council members, and then it would come up to a hearing. In part, that's we're doing this in via local law, and the council cannot remove. We can't curtail ourselves. So we can't remove our fundamental powers as a council, even via legislation. So we can't move us from that process entirely. It just sort of it proposes moving a set of actions that are currently mandatory into a discretionary bucket so that if the council took issue with a particular application, they could still call it up.
Yeah, I guess I just would appreciate if you guys could do some more thinking on a way to ensure that, council member deference doesn't continue to result in projects that are really worthy and could be great for the city. I know, Industry City had very mixed feelings from people, but like it could have been a real boon and the local member shot it down. And I kind of fail to see how this will deal with that. And I know, again, you can't, change ULURP without amending the city charter, but yeah, I don't know if there's some other workaround you guys can think through. But.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, and we're taking input on it. I mean, in an ideal world, let's take Industry City as an example. I think what this would do is provide the set of like very well developed resources that neighborhood needs in order to sort of accept development or rezoning applications in a way that obviously the council member was doing a ton of work with coalitions on the ground to sort of identify what the pressing needs were, but it wasn't informed by all of this good data in terms of what the actual physical needs assessment were. And the 197A plan that was in place was ignored. So this would really require for all of those aspects to be folded into the long-term plan in a way that developers would be responsive to, as opposed to sort of us being responsive to developers. Right now it's like we're expected to be the ones to like form the working group to identify the priorities for what the investments are and what the changes are to the ULURP application. This would sort of front load that process so that community driven conversation would happen in this planning process on an ongoing basis, and developers would look at the plan and be responsive to it. But your point is well taken.
Jeanette, I know you wanted to go last.
Seema had her hand raised.
Oh, all right, sorry. Seema?
Thank you. So As several people have mentioned before, I applaud the goals of equity and infrastructure planning, which are often sort of afterthoughts in the whole process, and especially the goal of trying to sort of normalize and rationalize the morass of current planning right now. My concern, and I think it's sort of the flip side of Melissa's concern, which is how do exceptions to the plan happen? Because, you know, if we as a community, wherever we are allowed wherever we are allowed input, give our input to create this very comprehensive plan, the idea that there are going to be exceptions, obviously there needs to be some kind of flexibility for, you know, massive events that happen like the one we're in right now. But overall, I'm concerned that, you know, we could still have, you know, a building that's completely out of scale, that's not in keeping with our neighborhood targets and goals, that, you know, goes through ULURP and gets passed without, you know, our consent or frankly, really our input. Because currently, you know, obviously we're just advisory. So it's a frustration that's ongoing right now, but you know, after putting in all this effort, it feels like it would be more insult to injury. If you could talk about how that works, that'd be helpful.
Sure, I can do my best. I mean, I think part of the flexibility, obviously, with respect to council members' ability to still sort of call up applications that are consistent with the plan is exactly, you know, responsive to the concern that, you know, the next Sandy, knock on wood, that doesn't happen, will hit, you know, in a point in time where a plan was just adopted and it just simply no longer makes sense anymore, right? Like the conditions have changed, which is why we sort of built in this process where the CPC will be required to sort of explain itself. And in some cases, that may be more convincing than in other places, right? So they may explain themselves by saying like, sure, the community identified this as an area for manufacturing retention, but they really need housing over there, and then approve that application as though it's conforming with the plan. This would leave flexibility for council members to sort of say, well, that's not exactly right? You know, like this is a site that was identified for manufacturing retention and we need to respect that plan. They would be able to call up that action. So it sort of leaves the council the ability to refute the CPC's determination, which, you know, some council members in particular have had a lot of experience with their, you know, disagreement with the CPC in that area. And it would also allow for the CPC to provide really legit reasons for changing their decision. Like, for example, that area is completely flooded and underwater and this plan no longer makes sense, right? And so like we need to build new infrastructure, and this plan identified that area as a place that, you know, appropriate for housing, and something failed, something went wrong, and we need to do something different. So I do think that flexibility is important. This does leave that flexibility for a reason, but, you know, we are doing sort of our best to create the guardrails in the actual legislation to make sure that that conversation is as transparent and accurate as possible. And so we'd welcome feedback on that as well.
Annie, I know you only have 5 minutes left, and you have to hear from Jeanette and me.
Okay, great.
Jeanette, would you prefer to go first or second?
I'll go second if you like.
All right, it's fine. I agree with much of what has been said tonight. First of all, maybe I'm a little slow, but I found the document planning together to be in some ways incomprehensible. It doesn't get into the weeds the way we would like to. It doesn't really describe in detail the process, and it doesn't really describe the legislation in any way. We haven't read the legislation yet, but we will. But apart from that, I think that there are some good ideas in this document, and there are some real needs that you've identified. I'm not sure, and I agree with Shelley and others, that I'm not sure that adding a level of bureaucracy the way this seems to be headed is the right way to do it. If there is an issue about budget planning, that's a legitimate issue, and there's an agency that takes care of budgets. If there's an issue about land use, there's an agency that is, despite what Peter says, is supposed to be dealing with land use. And in fact, has just passed a comprehensive rezoning dealing with climate change. So I would rather see something that takes advantage of existing structures identifies, and of course, the overwhelming and overweening issue of diversity. But I don't think adding a bureaucracy that's going to take 10 years to reinvent the wheel is the way to go. But I think, in fairness to you and the council, we need to look at the actual legislation, and we will be at some point in the next couple of months. I take it we have time, right?
Yes, indeed.
So some point in the next couple of months, we will be drafting our general views about the legislation and probably some specific suggestions in case our general views are not credited. Okay, Jeanette.
Thank you. And I would just ask everybody on the committee or the community board to send us their bullet points of many of the points that they made today, because I think there's a lot of overlap, but there's some really good points there. I agree with what Ethel said, that it would be great if this was just, you guys had just done this study and you were like, these are all the issues, and we believe there should be comprehensive planning. And now you're coming out to the community boards to get input, rather than coming to us and saying, this is what this new structure we're proposing and legislation that we're going to start. I totally agree that comprehensive is a good thing. I'm a guru because I'm a planner. And I think you summarized very well a lot of the existing problems and all the different studies, and a lot of those studies and reports are tied to particular funding. I am not comfortable, however, that what you're proposing with the city council as the lead is really going to solve the issue. A couple specific points and then general. I feel the community district needs is a very piecemeal way to pull together what local priorities and the focus of a community board is. We often end up having discussions where the housing committee is talking to the parks committee, is talking to the transportation committee, and we're putting, housing versus a bike lane versus a playground. And those aren't really realistic how we need to look at budgeting. And the way the district needs statement is laid out, it's not a good starting place for planning from my point of view. The 197A plans, I've worked on a number of them. I think a lot of them are very good, but even those plans that have been approved, they've been approved after city planning and the mayor's office watered them down, and then they haven't been followed. And so, the community board is really at a loss as to how our input really is going to formulate this. I feel that when you have this new commission with 4 members appointed by the mayor, 4 members by the city council speaker, and then the borough presidents, you're not going to get equity, because it's not going to be that the mayor and the speaker are representing Brownsville or East New York. They're going to be representing the Upper West Side or one of the wealthier neighborhoods. That's how our politics works. So you're not going to have that equity, even though everybody has good intentions. It's just naturally not going to flow. And what you'll probably end up more is with a lot of earmarks and horse trading, which is one way to balance funding, but I don't think it gets at the comprehensive planning way. I agree with Shelley that, borough-wide planning, I think is a step better, because it's much easier for communities within a borough to compete with each other than to compete with Manhattan's central business district. Maybe that'll be different now post-COVID, but I think there's some value to that. And the borough presidents already try to do some of that coordination, and the city council working with the borough presidents, working at that borough level might be a better way to go. I also feel like right now, if you want coordination between agencies, that's the deputy mayor calling in the agency heads and saying the mayor wants this done and he wants this done now and we need a ribbon cutting. That's the only time it happens. And that it's just pie in the sky to think that city council, that this is going to change. So what I would like to I mean, we'll pull together our comments and give them to you, but I would like to see sort of what your major goals are. And I think for us, what I've heard tonight and what I know is we want stronger community-based planning early on. We want the resources for it. We want to improve agency coordination. And also we want to streamline the review process. I don't think creating another review process is going to be helpful to our city. I agree developers have the upper hand, the real estate industry in the city, but we need it to work. It's too easy for them to go to other cities right now. And so we can't just create yet another layer on top of our complicated zoning and everything else. So really, really thank you for coming and presenting. And we'll try to put together I don't know if it's a resolution or whatever, but to helpful with your points, and we'll take a closer look at the legislation, and maybe we'll have a chance for you to come back.
Annie, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time with us. It must be a hell of a job that you have going from one community board to another and going from pillar to post. Unfortunately, I have your phone number, and we may call you from time to time for clarification.
Not at all unfortunate. I welcome the phone call. So thank you for having me. I do really appreciate it. I'm listening to all the feedback, but would appreciate any in the form of a formal resolution, but also more informal emails, phone calls, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's going to take us at least a month.
Yes,
I think
understood.
That's not a problem.
Right. And this will go through a legislative process where amendments will be made and the bill will look a little different than it does now. And so whatever is best for your process, I'm happy to be helpful as a resource, and we'll continue to be here and listen.
Appreciate it.
All right.
On to your next meeting.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you.
All right. Any more discussion tonight on this topic, or can we go to the 85th Street?
Well, can I ask, and I'm happy to take this on, Richard, if everybody who commented or have additional comments could just send me bullet points of their main comments. And I think that's the best way then I'll try to filter and put everything together, and we'll send it around.
I'm going to do some minutes. And that'll contain everybody's comments. Yeah, just, get us bullet points, think about how we want to proceed. In the meantime, I'll read the legislation. Probably everyone else should too. I have to say that I can't make head or tails out of this this document, the public relations document that we got. I don't know what the process is, having read it a couple of times. Seema?
I'm also just wondering, I didn't realize that Anne was making the rounds at all the community boards. Is it also possible to get some sense of what the other community boards' reaction is to this as well?
We can try that. Maybe Steve can do that at a borough board meeting.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Huh?
Hello, Victoria. Tomorrow morning is the borough board.
Doug?
Now that you call me, I just wanted to say, and I'll put this in writing, very simply put, it seems like visually, it looks like it's a decentralized plan from ground up, but to Shelley's point and others, it really looks very top heavy, and it looks like it's actually very centralized and not decentralized. That's just my knee-jerk reaction to it.
The sense I get is they're going to pay lip service to the communities.
Yeah, but I also think on the other point, I'm not sure that they are going around systematically to every community board. I think not. I think that some have really invited, and Anne is going, but I don't think that that's part of a particular outreach at all. And I think there haven't been that many. I think she will be with of the New York Metro chapter, the planners, I think tomorrow night. And she's there with that, but I'm not sure that she's really going around to all the boards. Just some who've asked. And I don't think so many.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Richard?
Yes.
She is going to all the boards. And this actually was a different presentation you made from board 11 a few in January. But, you know, it's a big problem because they don't seem to care about CBs.
I think so. Okay.
Having trouble hearing you, Roberta.
They don't seem to care about CBs. So even though they've been going to different boards, they don't seem to care about CBs.
Care about?
Community boards.
Okay,
okay.
community boards.
Gotcha.
Can I ask whoever has their radio or TV on that they mute their sound? It sounds like somebody has a TV or a radio on. I think we're ready to go to 2330 Broadway, and I have not been involved really, but I wanted to sort of outline my understanding is that the construction project does not need community board approval. They received city DOT approval. They have a pedestrian walkway on 85th Street. And they just notified the community board as a FYI. And while a couple of the community board members were looking at it, they noticed that this is not a great situation with 85th Street and the restaurants across the street and such. And so then some ideas were thrown around. So before we get everybody's comments, I just want to say nothing, there's no approval that the community board has to give to the construction of this building. There's no approval that we have to give them to how they lay out their construction site that's already been given. But we do recognize that there's some issues and we want to see if we can make it better. Is that correct, Richard?
Yeah, I think the Mark and Steve and I had a call with the developer before you were chair, in which we threw out the idea. We said, look, this street is too narrow for cars, especially with the restaurants literally in the middle of the street. And is there a way of widening the roadway? And we said, you know, what about narrowing the pedestrian walkway or something like that? They came back to us recently and said, look, we feel that we would like to be able to change the contours. At present, there's an 11-foot vehicular roadway.
If I may, Richard, maybe Chris could put up the plan and we could describe.
Yeah, if somebody got the plan, can they put it up? I'm on a different.
Yeah, I'll be putting it up in a moment.
Yeah.
Do you have a Christian? Because I think I can find it.
Yeah, no, I have
and then maybe Mark or Richard could just walk through. I mean, I could walk through the existing, but I wasn't there, so.
Yeah, sure. Oops.
Yes, and blow it up a little, or?
Yeah, I think anyone can blow it up.
Okay.
All right. This looks like the proposed plan, I think.
No, this is existing, right?
This is existing, yes.
All right. Under the existing plan, you have a shed here, and the yellow is a walkway on the south side of 85th Street. This is 85th, this is Broadway. There is not enough room under this plan for trucks to come in off Broadway and offload within the site. So, and it also means that the space between the shed and the restaurants that line the block now is very narrow. It's 11 feet. It conforms to DOT regulations, but it just barely conforms. And, you know, we were sort of mindful of the fact that there are people in restaurants, you know, without much separation from this 11-foot corridor. What the Kristen, you want to put up the other one? Okay. What the developer proposed recently is to broaden the roadway by a foot. So this red line represents a fence that they'll put up, and there are 12 feet between the restaurants and the fence. They would eliminate the walking area and instead enlarge the distance between the crane and the outer wall, so that trucks, which would be queuing on Broadway here, would be able to come inside and offload within the project rather than have to struggle with doing it somehow from Broadway. The way this would be achieved would be to divert pedestrian traffic from the south side of 85th Street to the north side. For the most part, we're told that this traffic generally either coming from or going toward the 86th Street subway station. So being on the north side would not be an impediment to them. We would recommend, not recommend, but condition any approval we gave on putting in various safety features, such as a flag man here, which exists now, but we'd like it to be full-time, and a flag man at the east end of the site, so that they will be able to make sure that people can cross safely across 85th Street. We would also impose speed bumps, which would slow down the traffic crossing 85th Street, and signage at Amsterdam Avenue, asking drivers to try an alternate route if they can, and reminding pedestrians that they need to cross over to the north side. Steve, Mark, have I left anything out?
Can I ask a question?
Wait.
That's essentially, that's my understanding too. The way that they drew the speed bumps, you see them in the plan here, these yellow things. I don't think you can see my cursor, so I'm just going to describe them. Thank you, exactly right. My understanding of our conversation was that the speed bumps would be before you get to that enclosure, or maybe one before and one at it. But other than that, that's exactly what I recall having been discussed.
Yeah, that was, I mean, I think that you're right about the speed bumps. The traffic should slow down further east.
Can I, is it in order? Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, okay. When this was summarized at the last meeting, the telephone call, my memory, and I don't claim that my memory is perfect in any way, so please correct, but our discussion and summary did not focus on the shed, the construction needs, the traffic diversions, and so on, as part of the big construction process. We were told that this assisted living, for-profit, fairly luxury kind of upscale assisted living, that the proposal, that's what was summarized to my memory without us seeing anything, was the hope for the plan that there would be space, a kind of indoor lounge, or that which would be glass and which would be for the residents. And at least what we were raising, and that there need to be an expansion, or that the building would move out to the curb cut or something like that.
That was correct. That was the last time we discussed this project, and the architect said they withdrew that and they're going back to the drawing board and they'll come to us when they have a new approval. So we're no longer discussing that
Okay,
until
so
they come with a new
Jeanette,
proposal.
I
Yeah,
really
this,
thank-
Ethel, all of this has arisen since the last Land Use Committee meeting. And we presented it along with a proposed letter. We presented it to the steering committee. It's unfortunate. I mean, it's unfortunate for everybody because we can't give our approval if we're going to approve it before the full board weighs in. And they need to build the shed on the south side of the street before that. So they may be doing something which will cost them a lot of money, that is constructing and then deconstructing the shed. But what they get out of it is the ability to offload their trucks within the site, which we're told will substantially reduce construction time.
I appreciate that, but 2 sentences. I'm sorry. This is the first that I hear about this and that
Yes, it is the first you hear about it.
Thank you. I mean, now
This all happened like a week ago, less than a week ago.
Yeah, so I needed at least a sentence about that to clarify what we're doing, because if we're looking at the question of the shed and diversion of traffic, that's a completely different thing. And I don't know what happened at the steering committee because I'm not a member of the steering committee. So I thank you. I didn't hear this. I don't think many other members knew that either, but thank you for that. And I now know that we're not looking at what had been summarized previously of what they're planning at the street level. I don't know for a fact that they've relinquished it, but we're now looking at this dealing with the construction. Fine, if that's what we're doing, we can respond to that.
Fair enough, Ethel, you're absolutely right. This came up yesterday at the steering committee, and so we jumped into it with an assumption that we shouldn't have. But
also, there could have been one sentence in the email from Richard or others to say, this is what happened, one sentence, and then you never would have heard from me, because then I would have known what had happened, and so would others on the committee who also didn't know. Thanks.
That's okay. We always love hearing from you.
Well, don't be, it sounds condescending, but.
No, not
okay.
meant to be, please.
I like the info to know what I'm reading. Thanks.
Andrew?
Yeah, thanks. Has the developer told us how long shed construction will take and by how much that will reduce the overall time of construction?
Well, the shed, by shed, they mean the structure that would overhang the pedestrian walkway.
Right.
Which would go away if this proposal were adopted. The shed is going to be built in a matter of days.
And
it's not, it's a temporary. I'm sorry.
How much would the entire construction be shortened by?
They haven't said that. They haven't
said.
No.
Okay, thank you.
They haven't shedded any light on it.
No pun intended.
Richard, I'm calling by phone, and I believe they said significant. And Mark, if you can confirm, I heard almost as much as 50%, but we can confirm that. Mark, did you hear the same as that?
Yes, I did.
I'm actually
almost as much as 50%.
I'm a little dubious.
I'm just saying what they said.
The one thing it will do is it will get trucks off of Broadway more readily.
Exactly.
Okay.
I think Paige is next, then Mark, then Ken, then Rich, then Christian. Then I'll go.
Thank you. Can you put that plan back up? Because there's 2 things I don't understand. If it's
the
possible.
existing or the proposed?
The proposed. If you look at the bottom, where my finger, you can't see, but on 85th Street, you can see a gate and a temporary staging area, a crosswalk where the little green carrots are shown. where pedestrians are to walk across to the north side. And there is a truck in there next to the tower crane. And the issue is there's a tiny gate. My question is, how does that truck come down 85th Street? And if that gate is only a personnel gate and not a vehicular gate, it means if they can't drive down 85th Street and drive into that narrow slot, they have to do what the larger tractor trailer and larger construction, cement mixers, et cetera, have to do, which isn't really protecting Broadway. And that is taking a lane of traffic. And you see where that gray truck is at the top and the Chamford corner? That is an archway over with a shed, a sidewalk shed, just like the scaffolding, where the truck has to pull in front of the brasserie and then back in. So whenever a truck comes and makes a delivery, they are going to pull forward and then back in. And then you've got another truck on the side street that I don't even know how it gets in and out, because the green gate in the Chamford part doesn't really allow a truck of that size to maneuver that right-hand corner from the red to the green door. So
the crane would lift it in.
Sorry?
The crane would lift the truck in.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. So that's another hazard, because what happens when the cable breaks and the truck goes all over the place with 14 million?
I think he's joking. I don't, that's not the case.
No, but the thing is, you understand what I mean? That this is not, I don't really want to touch this. I think this is a DOB snafu. And the only thing we should do is monitor the situation and bug the hell out of the safety officer. 2 flagmen on this site is not nearly enough for any crane operation on something like this, where you're going to have diners and people eating outside across the street on a very trafficked way. I mean, I can't even see that where it's the word tower crane is on the list of description. That crosswalk going west is going to be hell. You notice that the construction enclosure and the hoist platform, et cetera, and the raised walkway to help people across the street still has to navigate in front of that Chamford entry point. And we had this problem with the Museum of Natural History, and they did a 2-lane switch and deliveries without at off hours to make sure that they didn't interrupt the traffic for those people who wanted to still enjoy sitting around the museum. So I don't know. I think this is fraud. And as an architect, I don't know if Peter's still on board, but I wouldn't go near this thing. I think we should list our safety concerns and throw it back at DOT and say this is unacceptable. Come back with a better safety plan. Thank you.
Paige raises a good point. It wasn't clear to me. I assume that the smaller truck on 85th Street in that diagram is the cement trucks that now can go directly in site. And so the good part about that is it would reduce the construction time, but it's not clear how those trucks get in and out. I don't know, Mark or Richard, if
they go in at the gate at the bottom there.
Pardon?
There's a gate on 85th Street.
But only, it says it's only for, it's a construction gate, but it's tiny. It's not like the big part here that has the big swing doors. This red part doesn't move.
I'm pretty sure, subject to Richard's recollection and Stevens, that both trucks back in from Broadway, which is how we avoid having a backlog of trucks on West 85th.
Okay, so regardless,
I agree. I think that's
the existing condition or the proposed, you're going to have trucks at the intersection backing into the site during the construction.
Yep,
correct.
Except that under the existing conditions, they can't really back very far into the site.
To get to the place where they back in, they have to go down 85th Street and sort of turn to the northbound side of Broadway and then back into
No,
the site.
they go up Broadway.
And then turn around and back in?
That's my understanding, but I can clarify it with the developer.
To do that, and if it's any kind of sizable truck, would they not be blocking one of the northbound lanes of Broadway at least then?
Yes.
At least, yes, but not, they wouldn't be queued up there waiting to get in.
No, they're going to queue up on 84th Street. Then they're going to pull up in front, go in front of 85th to 86th, and then have to make a very awkward.
Very awkward, yeah.
To go in between underneath the Shamford overhang to park. So
This is true. Yeah, this condition is true under the existing conditions and under the new conditions.
Right, and I think it's a recipe for disaster. I think we should list our safety concerns and throw it back at DOT, because this is going to block traffic. It's going to stop the bus, everything.
How many flag persons did they say they would have?
Well, the diagram shows 2.
We can ask for whatever we want.
Yeah, I don't think that's near enough.
DOT has already approved the plan that's existing. So we can raise issues to DOT with the existing plan. This is a new proposal. I have my own concerns with it, but we should think about it that way, that issue is going to happen regardless. Right. I suppose the new plan construction time would be shorter, so it would be a shorter amount of time, but it's not going to change that then.
If the shorter construction time saves the developers money, they can put that money into extra flag persons to make sure this whole operation is safe.
Sure. I have Mark and then Ken, then Rich, and then Christian.
Thanks. So I'll try not to repeat anything. I do support this based in part on what Jeanette was saying, which was that that it is an improvement over the existing plan for a couple of reasons, one of which is the ability to unload 2 trucks at a time instead of 1 by 1, which would otherwise be the case. I have another concern that we haven't touched on, though, that is that I want to make sure that we protect the in-street dining of the restaurants across the street. 11 feet in between the pedestrian walkway and the dining enclosures is pretty tight. And my concern is that if it ends up being too tight, either for the diner's preferences or, God forbid, a truck bumps into it or an errant car bumps into it, that DOT would then say, okay, the outdoor dining facility has to be trimmed or moved. And I want to support our restaurants' ability to have that space for their purposes. So increasing it by a foot may not seem like a big deal, but I think it is insurance for us as a community that the dining can continue. That's what I wanted to add without repeating.
I just want to add one thing that I forgot to add earlier. Linda Alexander walked the site today, and she said that the restaurants are encroaching somewhat on the north sidewalk. She said there's still room for a couple of people to walk abreast on the north sidewalk, but that it's certainly a factor everybody should know about.
Especially if we want pedestrians to use the north sidewalk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Ken?
Yeah, I went over to the site today also. I didn't see Linda. And I took some pictures. If you'd like me to share them, I can later. But my main concern is about the, we always talk about putting pedestrians first, and yet it seems to me that what's happening here is the needs of the developer are driving this, no pun intended, and pedestrians are being inconvenienced and endangered. People are, a lot of people may be going to the subway station, but a lot of people are going to start out their journey on the south side and then realize that they have to cross the street. And some people are going to be making a left on Broadway or going somewhere else. And I think it seems like we're doing this for the convenience of the developer. And why should we be endangering and inconveniencing pedestrians? It seems like there are other alternatives, two of which I can think of. One would be to turn 85th Street for the duration of this project into a permanent open street that would be local access only, 5 miles an hour. You'd only have access to it if you had to go to the construction site or had to go to a building on the block. And pedestrians then would be free to walk down the middle of the street, the way it was, remember, on West End Avenue this summer. That's one alternative. Another one would be to take out a lane of Broadway. Broadway's now northbound 3 lanes. We keep talking about actually making it. There are some proposals to make northbound Broadway car-free virtually, and bus and bike and pedestrian. So, and that's conditioned on, or presupposes the fact, and is made possible by the fact that there really isn't that much traffic going north on Broadway. And I think we could well afford to take out a lane. And what you would do is you would move the barricaded pedestrian walkway 1 lane to the west, and then create a space for trucks to come in into the construction site. So you'd have protected pedestrian walkway on Broadway. You'd just have 2 lanes on Broadway for that block instead of 3. And I don't know of any time that Broadway northbound, even at rush hour, gets backed up. So those are 2 things I can think of. Seems to be preferable to endangering and inconveniencing pedestrians.
Thank you, Ken. Christian, and then, or Rich, and then Christian. I forget who I.
Well, my point was made already, so I don't need to.
Oh, okay, Rich.
So I have 3 either questions or comments. The first is, it feels like we're kind of being held with our backs against the wall, and that they're ready to move forward as soon as tomorrow, and that DOT has approved this already, and that it's like something that needs our input immediately, or else will just be ignored. And my question is, why has it come to this? Why didn't they come to us sooner? And what's the urgency? And then my 2 other thoughts. One is, and this feels to me much more like a transportation issue than a land use issue, or at least both. And I'm wondering why this is before land use and not transportation. And then the third is, I know that we posted this on the website today, which I think does not meet the legal requirements for public notice. So I don't know that we can take any action today. And also, I think it's important that before we do anything, the full board has the chance to weigh in on this.
Just, Rich, to answer a couple of your questions, I can't answer one of them, but we're not going to do anything until the full board has a chance to weigh in March. I called the developer today to ask him about the timing, and he said, "Look, we can work on this whenever we want. They're going to have to, in the interim, build a shed, and if it turns out that they're allowed to increase the width of the roadway and remove the shed, they're going to remove it." So the timing that I thought was exigent no longer really is, and we have time to consider this, including Ken's suggestions. But I would like to see if we can get the full board to vote on it in March. But that's to answer those questions. Why it's land use rather than transportation? Steve?
Yeah, Richard, I could do. And Rich, it's the same answer that you got a couple times. I just don't think you like the answer, which is the majority of the issues that we discussed multiple times were land use issues. And just like many things that come up from a board, there's tangentially go back and forth. The original issue but most of, and the majority of the conversations that we had were about land use conversations. And now it's sort of morphed into this area. And that's why we invited the committee for, that's why I coordinated with Howard and Andrew, and that's why Andrew's here for traffic to be here. I think it's completely appropriate. So that's the decision, that it's appropriate for it to be here. You are free to disagree, and you've done so several times before this call. And in terms of timing, I think that this particular group of people are sort of being assumed to be bad actors, and they're not. There were several meetings that happened. They developed and iterated each time they came forward. We continue to communicate, and sometimes this is just the process. I'll let Richard or Mark agree, but disagree or add to it. But this is our third meeting. We had a meeting, they came back. We had a meeting, they came back, and this is an iterating process. So this is how it went, but there was no sense of urgency. And I think what everyone keeps misunderstanding, and what Jeanette made is, they don't have to do anything. They were fine. They were just giving us a heads up of what was going on. This entire conversation came out of our request, out of our engagement, asking them. And we asked them to talk, and they did. So this new presentation was our request on our concerns. But the first meeting was we're just giving you a heads up. We want to be good actors. And I think that they've done a good job in doing that. And again, we have a handful of options here. We can do nothing, and we can be upset at the process, but they already have this approved. So they're trying to engage with us. We felt there was things that could be fixed. We felt the balance, or I can say on the letter, we were concerned about the pedestrian, but when we took the totality of all the things that we were looking at, then we took about all the mitigation, and then we thought we could get more. So to Andrew's point, we could certainly go back and say we want 10 flag people or 5 flag people. We can do that. But it was our opinion that this would be a better process. And we're free to then vote against that. If we wanted to bring it to the committee, if the other people feel differently, we can. But I think we just understand that we can't plop in the middle of it and make these assertions. It was an iteration process. It started in land use. And we can, I'll hand it back to the chairs, but we can act on it. We cannot act on it. There's several things we could do, and we'll vote. And that's how the process works.
And just for clarification, when you say that I've been told several times that about why this is in land use and not transportation, I did get one email from you saying, as of now, this issue started in land use because of the nature of the topics, and the plan is to finalize it there. Are there any other times when
I'll clarify that. I'll clarify several to one then, if you'd like to. But I think that you very well knew intent that we were going to discuss this. But we can move on. You've made your point, and you will.
I'd like to, if I can, get some feedback, if anybody cares to, on Ken's suggestion of closing the street to vehicular
Richard,
traffic.
before we do, I'd like to just point out a couple things. When I look at the existing conditions and the proposal, the recent proposal, I have a number of concerns that I would like to see addressed or discussed. I think the way that it's going up now, and even what's proposed, I don't feel that the restaurant seating on the roadway is safe. Rather than widening the street by one foot, I would request that Jersey barriers be placed along those residential seating area during COVID, and that if the construction lasts 2 years or beyond COVID, where the restaurant is no longer in the sidewalk, then I would request that the sidewalk be the southern sidewalk walkway be put back in place. I agree with the comments about needing more flagmen, especially for what's going to be happening on the intersection of 85th Street and Broadway.
Absolutely.
I find it incredibly irritating as a pedestrian to walk down a block and then find a building construction and having to cross in the middle of the street, and there being parked cars, and you end up walking down the street behind construction trucks. So I really would want to see a clear demarcation of that mid-block crosswalk, which frankly, I don't know if DOT would even allow it, but that it looks like from the from the pictures that Barbara took or that were taken today, that they had the crosswalk where you'd be crossing the street in the middle of the restaurant seating. So that doesn't work. So, and I don't like the idea of creating a precedent where we close a pedestrian walkway in favor of streets. However, I do think there is a huge benefit if we really are reducing the construction from 2 years to 1 year. And so I'd really like to see that more in writing or something. Thanks.
In terms of where the crossing is, I'm sure the crossing will not be into the restaurants. It'll be further up the block. But in addition, what I'm proposing is signage that will notify people at Amsterdam Avenue that the south walkway is closed and that they should proceed down or up the north walkway.
That's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It's a no-brainer, but it happens all the time. And even if there's parked cars there, if the cars are parked too closely, you're stuck in the middle of the street. So it's something that we say now, and then 18 months from now, nobody's monitoring it. So it's just really important to stress it at the beginning.
Well, if these measures shorten the construction time from 2 years to 1 year, 18 months, you'll be all back to normal and everything will be fine.
That's what I'm hoping for. It looks like we have Melissa and Doug also want to speak. So Melissa?
Oh, I just wanted to state for the record that I have a conflict, so I won't be voting on anything related. That was it.
Doug?
Yeah, I just wanted to say clearly safety is first, right? So pedestrians walking, we've got trucks backing up, and it does make me very nervous. So I just hope the safety plan is thoroughly thought about and rethought. I do want to point out, even though I understand the concept of closing the street and making it a pedestrian street, the one we're trying to help the small businesses, those restaurants in particular do get their deliveries and they also do their garbage drop off on that street. So, that's something we need to consider as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's
all. Jay has his hand up.
Yes. I unless I'm imagining it, if what you're talking about is closing the southbound side, the southbound sidewalk, basically.
Southern sidewalk.
The southern sidewalk, and anyone going east to west or west to east, any pedestrian would do so on the north sidewalk. Is that essentially it? So it seems to me the safest thing to do would be to divert pedestrians going from Amsterdam to Broadway and Broadway to Amsterdam immediately at the intersection
at the
to
corners.
the north sidewalk, so that nobody is crossing in the middle of the street. And if by doing so the trade-off is making the streets safer for westbound traffic with the restaurants and so forth, and you're lopping a year off the construction time, which is a benefit to everybody, including the residents, the restaurants, traffic, everything. It seems to me that would be a simple solution. None of the proposals are perfect. So no matter what you do, it's a trade-off. But it seems to me by just diverting the pedestrian traffic to the north sidewalk immediately, so that nobody is walking in the middle of the street or crossing in the middle of the street or being stopped and being prevented from crossing by parked cars. It seems to me that would be a very simple, logical solution. It's all temporary. to begin with, and it would be, the whole construction situation would resolve itself faster, which is a very good result. It seems to me you have a simple solution, and I'm happy if anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, but
Jay,
seems pretty
you're not
simple.
wrong, and there should be a diversion at Amsterdam Avenue.
Yes.
But there still needs to be a mid-block crosswalk because there are apartments on the south side of 85th Street. And people leaving or going into those apartments are going to need to cross 85th Street. But
That would be pretty limited, at least.
it would be limited, correct. But there would still have to be some sort of,
Okay, so,
you know, and
agreed.
probably a stop sign before that crosswalk.
Or you have to require that, they have some, either a stop sign or people posted, literally somebody directing traffic to provide for pedestrian crossing.
Mhm.
So, some logistical solution to the limited number of people that have to cross that street. I mean, the open street, notwithstanding all the various universal arguments one way or another about open streets, virtually all the traffic's going to be local anyway. And you're still going to have the trucks and garbage trucks and, emergency vehicles. And, so that, as a practical matter, I don't think that would solve anything.
Anybody else?
Ken has his hand raised.
Ken?
Yeah, just two things. One is a question and one's observation. When I was out there this afternoon, the best way to, this concern about the narrowness of the street, the best way to slow down drivers is to narrow the street. And I noticed that unfailingly, drivers that came down that street, when they got to the narrowed portion between the Jersey barriers and the restaurant, they slowed. And a normal sized car has about 4 feet on either side, leeway anyway. So I thought I'd make that observation, because I don't think that's really a reason to block the pedestrian access if that's our only reason. But I somehow missed this. Is the developer saying that if they don't have to build the shed and they do what we're proposing in this letter, then the construction time would be cut in half? Is that?
No, the developer said that if they didn't have to provide the pedestrian walkway on the south side, which they have to right now, and they're building it until, they get approval for otherwise. But if they didn't have to do that, they could widen the road by 1 foot, and they could have enough space within the construction site to allow cement trucks to go directly on the site and disperse the cement. And because of that, they could be much faster in the construction.
But by how much, have they said?
Well, that's what Stephen and Mark were saying, substantially and 50%. And we're saying we'd like to understand that more concretely, not to pun intended.
Yeah. I mean, they said significantly. So, I mean, I heard half, but we could clarify that. And I would just add something. I agree with Ken that the majority of the cars can get through there and they do slow down. I'm just saying that I observe, I live on that block. I live a little bit further down. And this whole thing got started because a U-Haul, which is have extra wide mirrors and is often ridden by inexperienced drivers, got stuck there. And I got stuck there for about 15 minutes. People had to get out, had to help the U-Haul, and it fit. But, it's very tight, and they were inexperienced, and we had to help them put the mirrors in. So this is what sparked this for me. I'm just saying I was there when it got backed up, and people then were trying to back up into Amsterdam, and it was it was an extravaganza. But I do believe the average car and average SUV will be able to get down through, and they do slow up. So I agree with all that as well. But I do have a concern about the tightness.
Well, the U-Haul problem, that happens on my block every other day because of double parking.
I don't think there's 4 feet on either side. If the roadway is 11 feet, that would mean that the car would only be 3 feet wide. I think it's a little tighter than
I
that.
sent some pictures into you guys. You could see that I sent you guys maybe just a regular car, and you can see it's pretty tight, and that's not even a wider car, you know. But anyway, it is what it is. I just love to share that.
All right, so now, I think we need to vote on whether or not to recommend the changes that are, and subject to very stringent safety provisions.
Well, maybe Richard, the first sort of just a general show of hands is, do we think there's problems with what DOT has approved and what they're built or are building? Or should we just leave it at that?
You're talking about Paige's comments?
No, I'm talking about, since evidently the plan that the developer has proposed is in response to a conversation they had with you, Steve, and Mark. Before we vote on that plan, since we have everybody here, maybe the first question is, do we think that there are issues with the existing plan that we want to make better? Because if everybody's happy with how it is, then there's no need to vote on changing it.
I don't know. I just think it makes more sense. You have the two plans, and if you like what is proposed better than what's there, you vote for it. If you don't, you don't. I don't know why you would break it up that way.
Well, because I mean, personally, I don't like either plan.
Well, that's transportation the transportation committee can get into that and suggest that the approved plans don't work. But that's definitely not a land use issue, I don't think.
Okay.
Can we get any assurances from the developer? Should we okay what they want now, that the construction period will be shortened by such and such %? They will have so many flagmen on both ends of the block, as well as people in the middle for those who are crossing from the apartments on the south side to the north side. Can we get any of this in writing from the developer?
I don't know if we can get it in writing, but I can clarify what they're talking about by substantial reduction. But I can't
that would be helpful. I
can't do it tonight.
Sure, of course.
And maybe the thing to do is if they come back and say, well, it'll cut a month off, people may want to reconsider their vote prior to the full board meeting. But I will certainly talk to them and report back on that. And Paige, is Paige?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Oh,
I wanted to ask
if you could just drop me a note about your safety concerns under either plan, maybe we can take that up with the developer too.
I'm happy to do that, but can I just give a little dose of reality?
Sure.
This is my profession, and I've never seen a job come in early.
Thank you.
Sorry?
Thank you.
It's true, because there are too many variables. The cement truck broke. The steel didn't get past inspection. The DOB guy didn't show up, etc. Peter knows this. So my concern here is, if you're asking them if these measures are going to save and expedite construction, the question is are these economies only to advance the sidewalk shed and exterior sidewalk areas so they can tighten in where their construction fence is, like they do in Midtown, on tiny little side streets in the 50s or whatever. Because I doubt, you should clarify with them, I doubt it means that they're going to deliver their project early.
No, they didn't say they delivered it early. They said it would reduce construction time. So if you build in a 6-month delay, this would be a reduction from whatever that is. It may still not be early, but it'll be faster
You
than
need to
without it.
clarify. You
I
need
will.
to clarify if this is infrastructure, because when they put the transformers in the sidewalk, when they put in DEP's, what is it, their tumbler for their sewer system that's going to go out to Broadway, and you're going to excavate Broadway to make those connections or wherever it is, you need to clarify, is this cost cutting? I mean, is this time saving going to reduce the amount of inconvenience to the exterior of the passageway around the block? Or are you talking about getting finished early? Because the two of them do not equate. I don't believe it.
All right, Rich?
Yeah, so, I mean, I feel very strongly that we can't vote tonight because we did not do the public notice that's required. I also think this is a transportation issue. The one thing I think we can do and should do is raise the safety concerns that Paige and others have raised, and just make sure we're on record that we have safety concerns with the current plans. And then I think there have been some creative ideas talked about, things that might be done to address the situation, and those can be discussed with a properly noticed transportation committee meeting.
What we can do, you've met this month, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah. What we could do, I suppose, is notice a joint committee meeting a half hour or an hour before the full board meeting.
Yeah.
And that
And
way
you'll
I'll
find
be
out a
able
lot
to
of things
be able
in
to
time
get
for that.
clarification from the developer about all the questions that have been raised, and maybe some
That's the right way to
clarification
go, I think.
on safety.
And one other question I would have is, if we were to do some variant of this, would it increase truck traffic on 85th Street? Would it mean that trucks would come in on 85th Street instead of going up Broadway?
My understanding is no, they would still come in from Broadway.
And then back in.
So, but now, by the way, apropos of nothing, there's going to be a significant amount of disruption of traffic on 85th Street because Con Ed is going to have to do a lot of work there. I don't think that really affects our decision, but don't be surprised if the street is ripped up sometime soon.
Is that for this project or just separate?
Yeah, for the project.
And they would close the entire street when that happens.
Yes, and put signage for Broadway, use 86th Street. Very easy. Yes.
And they were very amenable to having a flagman at every time that happens, up all the way up at Amsterdam, so that accessorized vehicles, for example, could get into the block, notwithstanding the problems with the cables under the street.
We would also recommend that signage be put up on Amsterdam between 84th and 85th, saying construction on 85th Street, if you can, use an alternate route.
Yes.
Which raises that's a big step towards what Ken proposed in making it an open street. And another safety question we might ask is what they're thinking of in terms of flagmen and how often flagmen would be there.
Yeah, well, I think we need to decide what we want and not what they are thinking, because our approval should be conditioned on what we think are appropriate safety measures. Doug?
Yes. I just for clarity, and looking at that plan that you had up on the screen before, do I understand that the cement trucks are going to go northbound on Broadway, cross the street, make a sort of a reverse K turn back up, and then go back in through the gate? Or are they going to be backing up? There's no, because I'm looking at the plan. Thank you for showing that. So I see that the entryway is westbound, correct? So that truck has to go up Broadway, if I'm reading this correctly, back up
No.
the street, no?
Yeah, well, they'd be coming north on Broadway from 84th.
Yes, so
Yeah.
so north on Broadway,
Yeah,
and they're gonna have to stop traffic there, cross, presumably depending on how long the truck is, cross that
Why
intersection.
wouldn't they come on Amsterdam?
And make a left.
Yeah,
Yeah, well,
Well, they may also go on 86th Street and then go south one block and just turn a left turn into the site.
okay, so, but what I'm saying is that they can only go into that area where the truck is through that gate that is on the eastern part of that enclosure, right? There are not. Yeah,
right.
that
Western.
right where so what I'm seeing where the cursor is now, that is the corner, right? That is the south.
That's where they would back in.
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm seeing another gate there. So that gate is for pedestrians only on the east side of that red line, all the way back.
Yeah, no, I think
Okay.
Yes.
it's not for pedestrians. This is the,
Not pedestrians, but
there's going to be a fence to
But you
in
see
the
that-
roadway.
I guess, and maybe this is just, but the truck that is facing west, that is just by the crane.
Right.
What I understood was that there is another gate on the eastern side of that red line, and that the truck is going to go through there. So that is incorrect. The truck is backing up, which is on the south east corner of 85th and Broadway.
That's right.
I think
Backs
so.
up- so it backs up and then comes back out that way. It doesn't go in from the 85th Street side going westbound.
Correct. It can't because there's a tower crane. That platform is cantilevered above it. And you would have a terrible time hoisting stuff on and off.
Okay.
So it has to come to the back side of the site. I have one quick question, and I forgot to ask it. Andrew, do you know if there is a moratorium on construction on Broadway? Because I've done projects, new buildings on Madison Avenue, and there's a moratorium. I think it's from Thanksgiving through middle of January. You can't do any sidewalk deliveries or crane hoists. Is there anything like that on the west side?
I have not heard that, and I've seen construction in the 90s ongoing, but I don't know that I've seen a crane delivered either.
Right. So I think that's a question to ask is say, is this site subject to a moratorium?
Yeah, absolutely. Got to ask that question.
Completely forgot about that because that needs to be factored into their construction and their erection schedule as well. Sorry.
That's a very sensible question to ask, and we should get the answer. I will tell you that at 91st Street and Broadway, they were putting cranes in all through December.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought I saw that. Yeah.
It's probably because we're not, commercial midtown or something, but the crane is already there, is my understanding.
The base might be, but they haven't put the hoist in. I don't recall seeing the infrastructure for the pulley system and the cabling. But on Madison Avenue, it goes from 57th Street to 72nd, and then there's a week for Christmas all the way up to 86th Street is the moratorium for any work in construction. You can't even put a new curb in or get your gas meter replaced or something. It's crazy. But it just occurred to me, the city's getting very cost conscious and doesn't want to interrupt their revenue stream. And it's one way of collecting more fee from the contractor.
Can I ask a dumb question? Is the entire point of having the trucks being able to park on 85th Street, is it just a matter of having an additional parking space for a second truck to be able to unload? Or what's the benefit?
In my view, if you're asking me, Peter may have something to add, is that when a site is really busy, they have crews early in the morning, delivering the concrete and the rebar, if it's a concrete frame building. And then what happens in the next phase is they're starting to stockpile air conditioning units, big stuff that's going to go on the roof, and they bring it to the site and store it.
Well, it's exactly right, Paige. It's because they're trying to rush the job now. that
Right.
they need This extra parking for their trucks.
It's amazing how everything still comes down to parking. It's basically just they want another parking spot.
Well, because what they do is the flagmen, not the ones that are looking after the pedestrians, but if you go to a very active construction site, you'll see that the trucks, you can see it in front of the Museum of Natural History. If you get there at the right time of the day, they're slowing down 2 or 3 blocks away and start to mosey their way in like cattle, and one at a time goes in, drop their load and go. And the next one pulls in. It's almost a ballet. Richard, you'd enjoy this.
Would this truck presumably be idling while it's there?
Sorry?
Would this truck presumably be idling?
It has to be because the hydraulics that run the lift on the back of the trucks is what powers the lift mechanism. You can't
So
turn.
that's right across from an open air restaurant.
Yes, I probably wouldn't eat there that week.
Well, we're talking about more than 1 week, right?
Well, it depends when their delivery hours are. They have to, they will have a foreman that will know.
I'm not sure what we're talking about. They're going to be building this building. We're not going to stop. So the question is really whether we have a wider roadway or a narrow roadway, and two trucks rather than one.
Are we going to vote on
And they're not going to reduce the number of trucks or the hours idling. In fact, this system may reduce the hours idling because you can unload 2 at a time. So, you know, and the open air restaurant, as I understand it, is open. Maybe you were there, Ken. Is it open to the street or is it open only to the sidewalk?
Only to the sidewalk. It's wooden on the back.
All right, fine.
So are we going to the pre-meeting? Is
Yeah,
that the
I think
wrap-up?
if no one has any objection, I think we should adjourn tonight. I'll try to get some answers to some of the very good
That
questions.
makes a lot of
that have been
sense.
raised. And we'll meet, let's say, 6 o'clock on the night of the full board meeting?
That
give us enough time.
I defer to Stephen, but I would recommend meeting at 5:30 or 5:45 because
That's fine.
I think this might not be a short conversation, and folks, you know, you're always waiting for a couple folks to show up. So
you're right.
5:30 is fine.
It may be also helpful to have some of the answers sent to us in advance so people
Yes.
have a framework.
Yeah, whatever I learn,
Good idea.
I'll circulate.
Great.
Great.
Thank you.
Are we ready to go?
Motion to
I have a
adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
Thank you, everybody.
All
Thank
those,
you.
all those in favor?
Bye-bye. Voting
All
on
those
IP.
opposed?
Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.